to hear as clearly. With that in mind, it's important to remember that accessibility is for everyone and can greatly increase ease of use in varying situations. So now I'm going to talk through some of the various bits of accessibility legislation. So this is the fun bit. Firstly, the Equality Act 2010 outlines the legal obligation to provide equal access to people with disabilities. And for Northern Ireland, this is covered by the Disability Discrimination Act 1995. Within the Equality Act 2010, it says that public authorities must comply with the public sector equality duty. This means that public organisations like central and local government, healthcare and education must think about the needs of people who are disadvantaged or suffer inequality when they make decisions about how they provide their services and implement policies. While the 2010 and 1995 laws have been in place for some time, there are now additional online accessibility regulations that public organisations must follow. These do not replace or supersede the Equality Act or the public sector equality duty, but are in addition to it. These are the Public Sector Bodies Website and Mobile Applications Accessibility Regulations 2018. They mean that public sector organisations have a legal obligation to make their websites and mobile apps accessible to people with disabilities. The public sector are obliged to comply with the standards set out in the regulations, which follows the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that's WCAG. There are 3 levels of compliance, A, AA and AAA. It's a requirement for public sector websites to be fully compliant up to level AA. And they must publish an accessibility statement which clearly states the level of accessibility across the website or app, amongst other information. These standards are designed to ensure that sites work well overall, but also with assistive technology such as screen readers and magnifiers. The Public Sector Bodies Accessibility Regulation came into force in 2018. By now, all public sector websites need to comply, and mobile applications will need to comply by the 23rd of June 2021. Internal systems, things like intranets and extranets, have a slightly different time by which they need to be accessible. If they are new, they should be compliant, and if they were published before the 23rd of September 2019, they will have to be compliant once they undergo a substantial update. But we also hope that organisations have started to make these accessible too. The Government Digital Service is the monitoring body on behalf of the Cabinet Office. We have identified tens of thousands of public websites so far. We test a sample of pages from different websites across different sectors. And we use simplified tests which look for large accessibility barriers and then also have more detailed audits covering more of the web content accessibility guidelines. We enforce the requirement to publish accessibility statements and refer findings from audits to other enforcement bodies regarding compliance to the standards. The Accessibility Monitoring Team has started to assess websites and work with site owners to comply fully with the new regulations. We will hopefully be sharing more about what we have found from monitoring soon. So, to further explain, while the Government Digital Service is the reporting and monitoring body and enforce accessibility statements, enforcement of compliance to the actual standard is carried out by the Equality and Human Rights Commission in Great Britain and the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland in Northern Ireland. Many organisations ask what happens if they don't comply. The regulations are covered by existing powers of the Equality Act 2010 and Disability Discrimination Act 1995. So if you don't meet the regulations, you may be in breach of these acts. This means the enforcement body can use their existing legal powers to launch investigations, issue unlawful act notices, and take court action against offending organisations. But it's not just a legal concern. Inaccessible sites are the worst sites for everyone. Improving the accessibility of a site may also help to reduce costs associated with people not independently finding the information and accessing the services they need. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines contain a lot of detail on how websites need to comply. So for this session, I'm just going to talk through a few common accessibility issues. Firstly, structure and navigation. It's important to use the correct coding practices throughout your website. When structuring content, many of us are guilty of using font size and making things bold to create headers, but these things are visual and aren't understood by assistive technology. Headings should be coded as headings, and lists should be coded as lists, etc. The page should also have a set language to aid screen reader pronunciation and have a clear, meaningful title to let users know they are on the right page. Using the correct page structures to format your page and content helps assistive technology read the page, but is also clearer to understand for anyone. And now onto link text. Similar to including a clear page title, link text should be meaningful and make sense without the context of surrounding content. This is to make sure it's accessible to users navigating the content with a keyboard instead of a mouse, and those using screen readers. Screen readers can usually pull up a list of links, so they need to make sense on their own. Links should also be formatted to stand out from other text. The example on the screen reads, "To find out more about applying for a driving license, click here," where click here is the link. In isolation, click here doesn't tell a user where the link will take them. In this scenario, it would be much better if something like read guidance on applying for a driving license was the whole link. Another thing to consider is how users will be navigating your site. Not everyone uses a mouse or trackpad. Some users will prefer to use a keyboard to navigate pages. It's important that the page can be navigated using a keyboard and that all interactive elements can be reached. This includes things such as links, buttons, and form fields. As you tab through the page, you should be able to see which element you are focused on by means of a clearly visible focus indicator. And be careful of keyboard traps, which hold on to focus and stop users from progressing down the page. This often happens with embedded Facebook and Twitter feeds if they are allowed to continuously scroll. Keyboard navigation is probably one of the easiest things to test yourself. And in the same way that not everyone uses a mouse, not everyone will be using a laptop or computer to access the internet either. It may seem obvious with the rise of smartphones and tablets that users have a wider choice of how to access websites, but it's still a common issue that these other devices aren't catered for. Responsive design, or reflow as it is called in the standards, is most commonly understood as how a page automatically adjusts to different screen sizes. The most common example being mobile view when using a website on a phone, which has a smaller screen than a laptop or monitor. But responsive design is also important for users who zoom in on a larger screen. The web page needs to respond to the size of the screen and reflow in a way that retains all of the content and functionality. For example, content such as menu items written across the page may collapse into a drop-down menu to save space on the screen in mobile view, but it still needs to contain the same options and function correctly. Now, documents. A very common question is whether documents are included in the regulations. The simple answer is yes, although there are exceptions. The regulations talk about documents as a format that is not intended primarily for use on the web, but that are included in web pages such as PDFs, Microsoft Office documents, and other open source equivalents. This means that your PDFs, spreadsheets, Word documents, etc. need to be accessible. However, this doesn't include documents published before the 23rd of September 2018, unless they are needed for administrative processes related to tasks performed by the public sector body. In reality, this means that even if a document is old, it still needs to be accessible if it's needed in order to interact with an organisation to complete a task. Documents can be harder to make accessible, and there's a lot of discussion around PDFs and their accessibility. PDFs are created to be printed, so they're not built to be read on screens. This means they aren't responsive. If you've ever tried to open and read a PDF on a mobile phone, you'll understand what I mean. It makes them challenging to read and means they aren't compatible with screen magnification. Although you can add structure into PDFs, this often isn't done, and they can be very difficult for screen reader users to navigate. Before adding a document to a web page, it's good practice to consider whether it really needs to be in PDF format or even in a document at all. Now we'll move on to colour. Colour contrast is another common issue. You must make sure there is sufficient contrast between the colour of your text and the background it's on so that it can be easily read. The guidelines state that you should have a minimum ratio of 4.5 to 1. There are various web pages and browser extensions which can calculate the ratio for you. The example on the slide shows white text on an orange background and orange text on white. It makes it a lot more difficult to read. Now the example on the screen has changed to show white text on a dark green background. This is much easier than the previous example. Good colour contrast will also help users to better see content in different lighting conditions too, such as if there was sun glaring onto a monitor or a mobile phone. The final point I want to make on colour contrast is about overlaying text onto images. The example on the screen now shows white text over an image of white circles on a dark pink background. You can make out some of the letters and guess what it says, but it's difficult. But it's much easier to read if the text has its own background to ensure good contrast. You can now see that the text says, "Can you read this?" You need to be careful about putting text over images where the background isn't consistent. Next, colour and meaning. Colour can be a useful way of adding emphasis and differentiating items on the page, but if you cannot see the colours, this additional sensory information is lost to you. It may be commonly accepted that a red button probably means stop and a green button means go, like on traffic lights. But just by adding text to your buttons, you can ensure that this same information is also understandable to users who cannot see those colours or may interpret them differently. The last common issue area I want to talk about is images and media. Alternative text provides a description for an image for users who cannot see the image. It can be read by assistive technology, but also displays when an image doesn't load. It's important that you keep alternative text short and simple, including only the information the user needs to know about the message the image is conveying. This means you needn't include things like picture of or image of. For example, the image on the screen shows a stack of pancakes. It would be enough to simply have the alternative text as pancakes. However, if there was an important message behind the image, such as pancakes being good for your health, then you may decide to write something like healthy pancakes instead, to add extra information the image is trying to convey. Now, briefly onto captions. A lot of video content is now viewed without audio, like on social media, so many creators already include subtitles or captions. They are essential for users who have a hearing impairment, but also really convenient for other users too. Good captions use a clear font with a colour that stands out from the background and include all the information contained in the video. If you are using a service which automatically adds captions to your videos, it's best to check these for any mistakes too. Likewise, other videos, animations, and GIFs can also cause issues. If a video has no audio or only background music, then users with a visual impairment will not be able to access the content of the video. These need an alternative too, such as a written or audio description. Animations, GIFs, and other flashing images, at the very worst, can cause seizures, but can also be very distracting and cause our eyes to ache. Web pages should not contain anything that flashes more than 3 times a second, and there must be a way to pause, stop, or hide animations which automatically and continuously play. So hopefully from the examples, you can already begin to see how increased accessibility of websites means they are easier to use. Everyone has the right to use online public sector information and services, including if you're using assistive technology or browser customizations, such as color changes or magnification. But accessible services also mean that services work well in other situations too, such as trying to do something as simple as look at your next bin collection day quickly on a mobile device, perhaps with excitable children rewatching their favourite film for what feels like the 100th time. It also means you may get through services more easily, access the content you need, and do not have to contact an organisation for more assistance. In summary, good accessibility means a better online experience. And then there's the current situation with COVID-19, meaning it's likely that more people than ever have been pushed into using online services rather than going out to see someone in person. This highlights more than ever the importance of good public sector websites, services, and content which need to be accessible for all, especially information relating to the pandemic. So the first port of call if you are having issues with a public sector website is the accessibility statement. As I mentioned, accessibility statements are a requirement of the regulations and tell users any issues they may encounter whilst using the website due to non-compliance with the regulations. The statement should be regularly updated so that it reflects the current state of the website, and it needs to include contact information on how to report issues and also how to request alternative formats of content. So if you come across an issue, the statement will tell you how compliant the website is and the contact details to raise a complaint. If you aren't happy with the response you get from an organisation, you can complain to the Equality Advisory and Support Service, who will take the complaint further. Remember, this is for everyone. I hope this session has provided a brief but useful overview of digital accessibility and the benefits it can bring to users. And if you want more information on the accessibility regulations, you can visit our site, which is www.gov.uk/accessibility-regulations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Catherine. That's been really interesting and a very thorough look at things. So, haven't actually got any questions posted other than are we going to be sending the slide? As I mentioned in the chat, we're going to be hosting a recording of this session on our web pages for Festival of the Future, hopefully either late this week or early next week. Does anyone have anything they want to ask Catherine while you have the right in front of you? So, Sophie, sorry, any advice on where we can get particular training on this, particularly for mobile apps?
Not specific advice. There are various different companies that run training. There's a lot of guidance on our campaign pages, which was the link that I read out. I think it's really up to the needs of your organisation, especially for the mobile apps bit, because that's a future date. I think a lot of people are still catching up with that requirement.
That's great. So the next question is from Duncan. Any recommended tools for the testing of websites and resources? I've got a feeling there's some on your guidance pages.
Yeah, so there are various automated tools you can use. You can buy paid for software, you can use browser extensions. We use a couple of different browser extensions in our testing, but the important thing to remember is that it's not going to catch all of the issues. I think some estimates are sort of between 5% and 30%. So we really would recommend also doing manual testing or outsourcing a specialist to test for you to make sure you're covering those manual issues.
That's a really good point. That testing by external companies is you get it from the user perspective of what it's like, particularly if you're using someone with. They will actually tell you what it's like for them, which we found very useful in my last authority. So what have we got up next? Harry has hopefully suggested abilitynet.org.uk for training.
Yeah, they do have a lot on there, yeah.
One of my awesome team, Susanna, has just mentioned our team can actually give more specific advice within Dorset. So if you're a Dorset employee, do knock and we'll hopefully help you along with that. The next question is from Matt. With the regulations that come in, are you aware of any legislation that will impact non-profits and the charity sector specifically?
So the regulations clearly define who is included in them. I don't want to say it off the top of my head without reading the specific wording. But other than the actual regulations that are in place now, I'm not aware of any other legislation additional to it. But there are a couple of things mentioned in the regulations that you might just want to have a look and see whether you fall into those categories.
That's really useful. I guess the other thing to say is the principle is let's make sure everyone can use a service that's online, regardless of whether they're covered by the regulations or not. So
yeah,
even if the regs aren't there, have a go. Right, any more questions? Does anyone else have any questions? It's all gone quiet. If you fancy unmuting and yelling it out, if you're a bit sure, we can do that too. Okay, well, it looks like we've exhausted. Jonathan's just usefully pointed out some we can give accessibility training on that link, so we'll make sure that gets covered in our material we put up online. No, well, if that's it from everyone, I'm just going to thank Catherine once again teaching us more about this, and hope everyone else will with me that thanks in her doing so. So many thanks, Catherine.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I've got a few more questions coming up now. Can we share the video organisation? You relate to the game there, Amy, but I'm going to allow it. So we'll be putting the videos up on YouTube, so you can certainly share those within your organisation, embedding them in pages or linking to them. So that's absolutely fine. Great. Great. So lots of thanks coming in. That's brilliant. Thank you all for being so positive. And I think we'll close the session now. Thanks all very much.
Okay. Thank you.